Welcome to the I'm Book podcast. I'm April O'Leary, and this is the YouTube version of our podcast. To get the audio version, you can hop on over to Spotify or anywhere that you consume audio podcasts. We are going to jump into some really cool content, so stay tuned for our next guest. We look forward to connecting with you, and be sure to subscribe. And to start your author adventure, hop on over to o'learypublishing.com, where you can map out the entire process and see what writing a book would look like for you. Let's get started. Welcome to the I'm Book podcast. I'm April O'Leary, and I'm super excited because today I have an amazing guest on, David D.L. Jennings, who is an amazing author I actually met in South Beach, Miami, a few weekends ago through Tabitha, who is a mutual friend of ours, and she did the Beyond Words Book Fest. And it's great to have you on the show.
It is so good to be here, and it's great to see you again too. We had such a good. I swear, I told Tabitha, I was like, next time, as soon as you start doing the planning for next year's, you got to let me know because I'm going.
Yeah, I know. It was such a great time, and I learned so much. I'm sure most people did. And it was so much fun interacting with other authors and other publishers because we all sort of run in this same network, and we are sort of few and far between, I feel like, when we get into our own zone, sort of. But to be in the same room with all those people was such a great experience.
Yeah, I mean, it was such great energy, and I use this when I use that word when I was filming like the promo for it, because she wanted us to do like little author intros. So I sent mine in, and that was a specific line that I used, was talking about the energy, because there was such good energy at the one that I went to last year, which was my first. I guess it was the second one that she'd done. And I knew right away, I was like, this is something that I want to be a part of. It's just such a great community.
Yeah, for sure. So we decided to hop on a podcast and connect this way. And so we haven't done any prep for this conversation. One of the things I love about podcasting is just having a real conversation and recording it and letting it organically unfold. So if that's all right with you, that's sort of how I roll.
Oh, that's perfect. I was a host of my own for about a year or two, back when I was in the Air Force. It was a super fun thing to do. So I am very used to being long-winded and talking talking on the fly about all kinds of stuff. So that's my forte.
Well, I love it. And it's interesting because you do have this very rich background in military service. And thank you for your service, by the way.
Thanks for your
And
support.
let's talk a little bit about that because you're a 14-year veteran of the United States Air Force. So how did that affect you in getting into writing? I'm wondering how those two pieces connected for you.
Most people do. The Air Force was such a great stepping stone for me, and it was such a wonderful opportunity. Both my parents were in, which is why they basically convinced me to join as well. So I was in college when September 11th happened,
Mm,
and I was the talk at the time was like, they're going to reinstitute the draft. I was young. I was in my 20s. So I was like, well, looks like there's only one thing for me to do. So, as soon as I could, once I finished up with college, I actually enlisted in the Air Force, and it turned out to be the best decision of my entire life, by a very wide margin. And writing was something that just sort of happened organically because during the majority of my Air Force career, I was under AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command.
mm.
And the career field that I was in at the time was the most heavily deployed. And I believe it was in the top 1% for ops tempo, which meant like not only were we gone a long time, but we were also gone more frequently than anybody, just about anybody in the entire Air Force. So on those deployments were when I found writing. And
Okay.
it's funny because I was talking to someone about this recently. I discovered the term. This is a real like I don't know if it's a medical term, but it's a real term. It's profound boredom. And it's like our levels of boredom are normally right around here. And they'll dip occasionally, just enough for us to be like, all right, let me throw on some Netflix or something. But profound boredom is what I experienced on deployments, when we weren't out doing an operation. And it was that which sparked me to be like, I need to do something, I need to create. And that was when I was on my very first deployment. I started writing what later became my first book, Gift of the Shaper.
Hmm. I haven't heard of profound boredom. I think that's I don't know if I could manage that level of boredom. You're right. Like normally you're just like Netflix, how can I stay busy? Well, I'll go to Starbucks, I'll get out in the car or whatever. But to be able to have those moments where creativity can surface, because I think that for some people who just continually remain busy all the time, creativity stays at bay because
Mm.
we don't give ourselves the time and the space to feel boredom at all, much less profound boredom, right? So once you started writing, I don't know, what was it like for you? Did you just say like, you know what, I'm going to just start writing and just see what happens? Or were you like, I'm going to write a really great book out of my profound boredom?
It was exactly item A. And I think at that point, sometime before then, my dad had given me Stephen King's On Writing. And
Mhm,
in it, he says, just write.
mhm,
And I took that literally. And I did exactly that. I had no idea where I was going with my story. I had no idea that I even had a story. Excuse me, but I started a chapter at a time, and I was like, and literally, I think the first decision that I had to make was, uh, okay, my main character has to have a job. What sort of job is he going to have? Should he be a farmer or, a blacksmith? And blacksmith actually, I mean, that was the crux of my story. I mean, everything centered around this kid being a blacksmith. So it could have been a wildly different story if I was writing about a fantasy farmer. Fortunately, it sort of took root, and I was reading the great Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series, The Eye of the World, at the time. So I actually drew pretty heavily from that, and I've heard people compare me to Robert Jordan, which is a massive compliment,
mm.
because he is one of my literary heroes, as well as being one of my military heroes as well. Robert Jordan actually also served and was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. So,
Wow.
again, signing up when his country needed him, and went on to have this fantastic career in writing. So yeah, Robert Jordan is like someone that I roadmap my own life after. So
That's
yeah.
amazing. Wow. So as you were writing, and you're deployed, obviously, so you're around other military, and were you sharing any of the stuff you were writing, or was this something you were just doing on your own and stuffing it back in your backpack? I mean,
So it's funny, I wrote the entirety of book one on my iPad, which seems like a totally insane thing to do, and it pretty much was.
you have a keypad?
Yeah, the little touch screen on
Okay.
my iPad I was using to crank out 125,000 words. Uh, but it was super useful because, like, when you go on an airplane, usually you have to wait for them to say, like, okay, we've reached our cruising altitude, you can take your laptops out. They don't do that for an iPad. You can just, like, as soon as you get in your seat, you can start typing. But I had mostly kept it to myself until I think it was like I was like 6 or 10 chapters in, maybe. And I had a pen pal of mine that we'd been friends since we were like 14. And I knew she had done some editing work. And I had sent her a few chapters. And I will never forget her response because it was what made me finish the book.
Mm,
She came back and said, "Listen, I know that we're friends, but if I'm taking off that hat for a second, this is legitimately great." She used the word great, which like
mm,
that's
yeah.
that kind of that gave me goosebumps. And she was like, if I was a literary agent, I would eat this up, were her exact words. And I'll never forget this, like 8 years later. And that was profound. It was one of the moments that, like, again, I think my life sort of took a real change in direction because of the response that I got from her. So
Mm,
she was the first person that I ever shared it with, and certainly the most impactful.
wow. Wow. It is interesting too, as a creative, the people that you allow in on that early journey. I think of it like a seed, right? If you've got a seed that's sprouting and it's very, fragile and has only a few leaves, you got to take great care. You can't put it in the middle
Mm.
of a pathway and people could trample it down, even if it has the potential to become a great tree. There's that potential in the beginning is so fragile, and the fact that she was so encouraging and saw the talent that you had is such a blessing, because had you showed it to someone else who said, dude, this is garbage,
Yeah.
right? And it's
Exactly.
only someone's opinion, right? And I think that's the interesting thing too, is being wise with who you ask opinions from. She obviously is an editor and she had some opinions that were informed, versus sending it to your old buddy, back from school, who doesn't hasn't read a book since third grade,
Yeah.
so
It was phenomenal because she would give me feedback, and she would, I mean, it was probably the most detailed feedback, short of my editors, of the actual book that I'd ever gotten, because she
Mm,
would come back and say, "Wow, this sentence is beautifully crafted," or "This idea here is so, reflective of your overall theme on this and that." There were some times when I was like, yes, I absolutely did that on purpose. But there were others where it was like, wow, this is meaningful feedback. And it provided me with that, that idea that I was doing something right, and then my writing was actually good. So yes, you're exactly correct. Giving it to someone who knows what they're doing, and who has an informed opinion about it, it was extremely valuable for me.
mm. Well, thank God for her,
Mhm.
and big shout out, because she maybe didn't know at the time that she was creating a great author in the making,
I
just by
dedicated
seeing.
the book to her, actually. So yeah, she's in
Oh,
the thank
wow.
yous. She's
Wow, that's
she's in
amazing.
the acknowledgments. Nicole Holmes is her name, and
Nicole.
yes,
Thank you,
it
Nicole.
thank you, Nicole. It would not have happened without her.
Wow. I love that. So, here you are writing on your iPad, which I think is
Mhm.
hilarious. So it was actually like you were typing on the screen. You didn't even have like a detachable keypad.
It was ridiculous. I was typing. I mean, I did a news thing in DC 2 years ago, I think, and I had the actual iPad. I mean, this thing was, it's war torn. It's seen some things, right? And I brought
Yeah.
it out, and they were like, "Is that the iPad?" I was like, "Yeah, it's got fingerprints all over it. I mean, this thing is beat up." So
Wow.
yeah, it was ridiculous, and I've since switched to using a laptop like a sane person. So
Well, you made the statement, where there's a will, there's a way. All the more true, I would say. So from the initial, idea and your first decision for your main character to actually getting a manuscript done, how long did that take you?
I want to say somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 years, possibly longer, because I've looked back at my notes, and again, in my iPhone and my just Apple Notes, and it conveniently it dates it. And I think some of the earliest stuff I had was from like 2014 or something like that. And I ended up talking to my publisher in 2016. So from conception to manuscript was just a little over 2 years.
Okay. Wow. Well, that's some good info there, because I think that there's a lot of work and a lot of editing and a lot of time that can pass when from idea to finished book. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily an overnight process. And did you find that even in part of the writing that maybe sometimes you got stuck, or your character went to a place you didn't really want him to go and you had to revise it, those kinds of
Oh,
things?
absolutely. So I'm a discovery writer, which, means it's like laying the tracks while the train is running.
Mhm.
It is both thrilling and dangerous. And there were so many times when I would, I'd come to a crossroads. Number one, I do say it's thrilling because there were times when I made a decision that surprised even myself for, I think, the better of the story. And there were a lot of times when that happened, when I came up to this crossroad and I look and I see another route that I didn't think was possible, and I take that route.
Mm,
Um, so that has ended up, being really fun for me because I don't know where the story is going a lot of the times.
mm,
Um, but at the same time, there was so much of that going back and, retrofitting stuff and, changing things after the fact, like, oh, well, now I have to change this fact to make this thing true. But we as writers, we're just professional liars. So that's one of the strengths that we have is that's our whole craft.
I've never heard it that we're professional liars. It's so funny.
I
Well,
think I
I
might
work
have made that up. I'm not sure.
I love that. Well, it's funny because most of the authors that we publish are nonfiction, so I'm hoping they're not liars.
Yeah, true. Yeah, you can embellish a little, but definitely stick with the truth and stuff like
Yeah, let's
that.
hope. But that's the fun thing about creativity and fictional writing, is that you do get to create these characters and the worlds they're in and the decisions they make and the routes they take. And I find it so incredibly inspiring. I've never actually written a fiction book. And I just think that the idea of it seems very overwhelming, because nonfiction is pretty straightforward. You know who your reader is, you kind of know what's their problem, what solution are you offering, maybe adding in some of your experience, some tips, that kind of thing. Where fiction, like you said, it's like this adventure where you're on a fast moving train and you're not sure where you're going. You don't know where your character's going. And just to probably enjoy the process of finding that out. And I know I've heard you're calling it discovery writer,
Mhm.
which I haven't heard that term either. But I know there are some fiction authors who kind of map things out in advance,
Yeah.
and maybe they bullet point where it's going. Would that be, that's just a different way to go about it?
Mhm.
Different way to skin the cat, so to say. Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah. I've also heard gardener versus carpenter, I want to say. Like, I think George R. R. Martin I believe he's a discovery writer. I could be wrong, but he says he's more of a gardener and he'll tend to the tree that's blooming, and cut clippings off. Whereas someone like Brandon Sanderson will lay out the blueprint for the entire house before he builds it, and then he has exactly what he's looking for, and then he builds it. So
Hmm.
Brandon Sanderson, who is I'm convinced not from this planet because of his I mean, the man is just so prodigious, and it's ridiculous. Like, I don't know how he has the time to write as much as he does and as well as he does too. It's not like he's Henry Ford just cranking out an assembly line of cars. He's Ford, but he's also Rolls Royce, where he's putting these beautiful, extravagant pieces together, and it's just like he's in a different league than most of us mortals.
Well, what I think is so fun about writing is that it's not a black and white process. It's like who you are, your experiences you have, the creativity you have. It's sort of like even playing a sport. Michael Jordan was a genius at the craft of basketball, but there are lots of other players. There's lots of other people on the team. There's lots of other, you don't have to be an NBA star who can dunk from the free throw line. You can be a pickup player at your local park and rec and still have fun. So I think that part of writing is just enjoying the process of it. It should feel like an adventure, I think, from start to finish. And even though maybe at times it's frustrating, did you find at any point in time during that first book that you were like, I'm just done with this? Like, this is too much, too hard. Or did you just feel like as it was going, you were more motivated?
I think there were definitely, it was a long process. It was a very long process. But I largely used it as an escape. It's no coincidence that I got some of my best writing and most of my writing done on deployments. It was a way for me, obviously fantasy fiction is about the furthest thing from military as it gets. So for me it was very much an escape. And I think for that reason I tended to stick with it. It was almost like it was a catharsis for me. So I definitely I don't remember feeling a lot of frustration. I do remember there were times when I was like, where is this going? What am I working towards? I have to have some sort of an end goal in sight for these characters to grow and to learn and to have a conflict. So there was a lot of starting and stopping, like maybe you know I think I actually went back and switched the central conflict like maybe once or twice while I was writing the book. Talk about like laying the track as the train is running. It was absolutely that. And I was like, you know, I think I can go back and make this a little more intriguing. So I definitely did that, but by and large, I would say like it was very much, it was always in the back of my mind. I was always thinking about my fantasy world and how to develop these characters and how to develop the plot. So yeah, I think it was something that I always just kind of trudged forth and did.
So you said you read Stephen King's book on writing, which is an excellent book. Were there any other books that you read about the actual craft of writing, or did you just sort of have at it with your iPad?
I did. I very much did. And it was really funny because a lot of people, when so after I wrote the book, I had pretty much been keeping it a secret. I was really sort of scared of failure. So I didn't tell a lot of people. It was like, hey guys, I'm thinking about writing a book. Everyone thinks about writing a book, but
Right.
I didn't want to be just another one of those people. And I when I posted it on, I think I made the announcement on Facebook. It was like, hey, I wrote a novel, 120,000 words. Everyone was like, you're a writer? Where did this come from? And it really was pretty much out of the blue. The only writing experience that I had was, I took an English course in college and I kept a live journal, like in my late teens. And besides that, I didn't ever do any writing. I didn't participate in writers' groups or anything like that. But I was a voracious reader. I always had my nose in a book. And for me, one of the reasons that I chose to write fantasy was because I grew up reading fantasy and I knew what right looked like and I knew how to craft sentences well because of my just depth of experience reading these books for my entire life basically. My mom, I remember, would read The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. That's the first one I remember. But from the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe series, I remember her reading that to us when we were kids. so fantasy has been in my blood, since I was young. And you know, so I took Stephen King's advice, and I just right out the gate, I just wrote, because that's what I knew.
I love it. I love it. It is interesting that you say that. I'm not surprised that you say that, but that we write from what we know.
Mm.
So for me, I read ever since I was a kid, I was reading self-help books. I don't know why I thought I had such a big problem at age 16. But I remember though begging my mom to let me get the cassette tape, The Psychology of Winning by Dennis Waitley from the mall,
Amazing.
the little motivational store at the mall when I was like, 15 or 16. I can only imagine like my 16-year-old is begging me for Dennis Waitley. I'd be like, hell yeah. And what else? What else do you want in the store? But she was like, I don't know, maybe. And so I've always kind of done that. And then that's where I've written from because that's kind of what I know. So, I think that part of the point of what we like to share on this podcast is that you don't have to be something that you're not. You don't have to
Mm.
create something that you're not interested in. You stem from what you know, what your experience is in the time you have. And there's no comparison between, well, I'll never be a Stephen King or I'll
Mm.
never be a C.S. Lewis or a Dennis Waitley. It's like what your voice is and the story that you brought to the table is something that only you could have done. And I think that's what's amazing. So once you said you did this 2-year process to get your manuscript done, and then you were like, now what? So did you look for a literary agent? Did you start shopping publishers? What was the publishing process like for you?
It was very involved, and I was doing it on my own because I didn't know anybody who had published a book except for my dad, who writes business books, which was severely unhelpful to me.
Hmm.
So, I don't know what to tell you. So he was no help. Sorry, Dad, if you're listening, but
Sorry,
who
Dad.
knows? Yeah. So I scoured the internet for, one of the articles that I wrote after I'd published my book was, "So you wrote a novel, now what?" Because I Googled that literal phrase, "So you wrote a novel, now what?" And, there weren't a lot of results, but I did a lot of digging, and I had a lot of time on my hands because I was deployed. Again, doing most of the heavy lifting while I'm overseas was a theme in my literary career, still is. Uh, and I picked up the writers market. I think it was like Writers Market 2017, and I combed through it for anyone who was had the word fantasy in their title. I think I even stretched a couple times and just did like fiction or whatever. So I queried for a few months uh, until I heard back from a friend of mine who knew someone at Indigo River who eventually became my publisher. And they said, hey, I can put you in touch with this person, who put me in touch with, uh, one of the managing partners at the time, Dan Vega. And, came across his desk. He was like, "Dave, I love this. Let's talk." And I was like, "I'd love to, but I am in West Africa right now. It would be very difficult for me to meet in person with you." So we actually did a Skype call. I'm out there in civilian clothes. I think I had a beard at the time. I can't remember, but I got on a Skype call with him, and he was like, "What are you doing out there?" I was like, "Can't tell you. Sorry." But the process, I think, I want to say it took something like 6 months from beginning of query to actually getting in touch with an eventual publisher. So, but it was a lot of work and a lot of rejection.
Yeah, I would say. So Indigo River was at the Beyond Words Book Fest as well, which is
Mhm.
exciting. And so the fact that, and some of my authors were at that event too. So it's a really nice collaborative event where there's multiple publishers and all different kinds of authors there too. So
Yeah.
once you got in touch with him and you had this 6-month process, was it 6 months of onboarding? And then after they onboarded you, then how long was it until you got the book out?
I remember I signed the agreement December of 2016, because that same week I also signed my divorce papers. So it was actually a great week for me. I was quite happy. My ex-wife not so much, but I was having a great week. So December 2016, I signed the agreement, and February of 2018, Gift of the Shaper was launched. So
Wow.
I was actually their first fantasy book. They'd done some fiction before, but I was their first fantasy, which I take as a very big point of pride. I was
Mm.
really, really proud of that. There were definitely some growing pains because of it. And, 5 years later now, gosh, 7 years later. Wow, I'm getting old. 7 years later, they have a partnership with Simon and Schuster, and like they are growing, and I'm really proud of where they are as opposed to where we were when I, you know, was starting out as their first fantasy title. But oh my gosh, it was a whole thing. But they did a really fantastic job of helping me out and giving me creative control, which was super important to me.
I love that. And you know what? That is important for anyone who's listening who's seeking a publisher or, doesn't quite know. There are things that you give up with certain types of publishing. There are things that you retain with certain types of publishing. So it's always good to know, like, read your contract, know exactly what you're expected to do, what the cost is, if any, what they're going to allow you to have a yes or a no over. I know there are some horror stories of publishing companies who will just design your cover and not give you a say in it, which I think is horrible because if you spent so much time writing your book, you should have a say on what the design looks like. So that's amazing. Congratulations on that. And you have multiple books now in that series. And I'm curious how it's going for you now wearing the marketing hat of an author, because for me, that's a totally other hat to wear. And it's something that most authors, are not familiar with. And it's also that learning curve of how to find your readers and how to grow that base and whatnot. So what have you done to cultivate your reader base?
Yeah, it's really funny. I remember my dad telling me after I had written the book, he was like, all right, now for the hard part. I was like, what are you talking about? I wrote a book. That was very hard. And he was like, trust me, you'll see what I mean. And it was incredibly difficult. It was a huge switch. But I was talking with River, who is our author liaison at Indigo River, and I've known her now for a couple of years. She's wonderful and amazing, and she was telling me, she was like, "You make it look so easy," and she was like, "I point authors to you all the time because the stuff you do is very organic when it comes to marketing." And I was like, thank you for saying that because that's very intentional. I love the stuff that I do, and I want that to emanate from me. And me being excited about my book is just a legitimate thing. And I'm like, hey guys, check this book out. It's good because I think it's good. Like as a fantasy reader, hell yeah, this is a good book. So, marketing for me has been, on the one hand, it's very fun because I get to tell people about my books. But on the other hand, I hate talking about myself. And like, I, I have always been the type who I want my writing to do the talking for me. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, like, you can't, the way the world works is you have to tell people about stuff, uh you know in order for them to discover it. So that's actually something that I've struggled with making content and trying to, instead of just like, hey, here's my story, check it out, also I wrote a book. I have to sort of shift gears to I wrote a book. Here's why you should check it out. And, social media is a double-edged sword. It's a wonderful tool, but it is also draining, emotionally and mentally draining. For me, you mentioned that reel that I put out this morning. I was working on it for hours yesterday
Yeah,
and it
I
was
can.
exhausting and I was so tired. I was like, oh, why am I doing this? But then I see the end product and I was like, that's really good. I'm so glad I did this,
Yeah. And if you
Um,
haven't seen the reel, if you go to DL Jennings, the Instagram account, and then you'll click the Reels tab and you'll see, and he talks about leaving his book for the people that come and stay to get as a guest at his Airbnb. And he leaves a bottle of wine and he talks about, it's just very cute how you narrate it, but you have the various scenes. It's almost like that's another creative outlet, right? Because you have to learn how to
yeah.
like be a mini movie producer.
I know. Yeah, it was funny. I had lunch with my dad in Pittsburgh this morning. Or I guess, yeah, this morning, and he was like, "Wow, this is so good. What program did you use to do this?" And I said, "TikTok."
Yeah.
And he was like, "What?" Yeah, and it was. I mean, I'm literally just sitting here on my phone, dragging and dropping and cutting and splicing, and uh, it was a surprisingly useful suite
Mhm.
that you could just do in this dumb little app for dancing.
Yeah. It is funny, right? Did you use CapCut? Do you use
Did I
CapCut?
what?
I was fooling around with TikTok recently and I wanted to get the captions where it follows, like closed captions, except for it's the captions that sort of appear while you're talking.
Mm,
And it had me download a app that plugs in with it called CapCut. Have you used that?
not
You have
familiar.
to try it. So they have a lot of different features on there. And so it kind of opens up this CapCut. You do a lot of editing in there. And then when you're done, it re-imports it back into TikTok. And
Wow.
it's like a little magical whatever. So yeah, I have fun with playing with those tools. But you're right, it can be draining because you can end up wasting half a day trying to get a 60-second video to put together.
Yeah.
So, so what is it, for from here now, you've got two books out, right? And you've got
Hmm.
another one on the way, which is going to be
Yes.
done when?
Great question. Officially 2024. But I
It's
don't
going to
know
be
the date.
released in 2024.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, super exciting. I just got the final, interior layout from the design team at Indigo River. And I had a call with River where we kind of basically she said, the deadline for Simon and Schuster's summer release is, in a week or something like that. So she was like, summer's not looking good. It's probably going to be fall of 2024. I can say with near certainty, which is, again, blessing and a curse because it sucks because my readers have to wait for book 3 to come out. Uh,
Right.
but it's great because we get all this lead up time. And I was like, let's not rush this. I want this to be the best book launch that I've ever done. This is the end of a trilogy. This concludes my series. And I think I've told a pretty good story, and I hope my readers will agree. But I want to be very deliberate about this. This is gonna be a good launch. We're gonna take our time, and I've got all this time between now and then to tell more of the world about my books. So
I love it. I love it. Well, it's been such a pleasure having you on today. You such an inspiring story. If you only have an iPad, listen, you can't have an excuse for not writing your first novel. Now you've taken that excuse off the table. And we know the value of profound boredom. So if you're too busy, just get a little more bored.
it has
And if
been
you
a
want boredom
genuine.
and if you really want boredom, join the military where you can get that, right? It's
Exactly. Yeah,
you
it's
can
definitely, it's not all boredom, but you will definitely
I
get
will
those
I would say it's
punctuated with
probably
boredom.
profound extreme highs and lows, maybe.
It's a very manic existence.
Yeah, I would say. Well, I would say you're such a pleasure to have on the show, and your books are amazing. To find out more and to get your books, they can get them anywhere books are sold, or check out at dl-jennings.com, and that's going to be in the show notes. Is there anything further? How else can people connect with you, or what's the best way for them to interact with you and your books?
I love Instagram. I'm just dl.jennings on there. I got the little blue check mark, so easy to find, which is nice. I'm on Facebook as well, DL Jennings, and I love interacting with my readers. That gives me the greatest joy, and that is not an exaggeration. I even end that reel that I put out this morning. I end it by saying one of my greatest joys is when someone tells me they've enjoyed my book, and that is so true. It's funny because when I was previewing the reel and making sure like it's good to go, I mentally was saying, yep, that's true, when that part came by. So it was like everything in me, it agrees with that. And that is a true statement. So I love it when people enjoy what I've written, and hearing from them is one of the greatest joys, for sure.
I love that. I think most writers feel that, it's not necessarily having a New York Times bestseller status or selling millions of copies, although that's amazing.
Yes.
But it's having those one-to-one connections where somebody says, I enjoyed your book, or this book got me into fantasy fiction, or this book rivals, the likes of these very famous authors that you are now on a pedestal with. So, it's really such a beautiful thing that we offer the world as authors, that brings people together, and to hear from those people that they're not the anonymous mass out there of people who read, but it's one person who says, dude, your book was awesome. It was amazing. Right. So reach out to your favorite authors, your favorite authors that are on Instagram, send them a message, tell them you like their book, and by goodness sakes, leave them an Amazon review.
Oh,
right?
100%. Absolutely.
Leave a review, 5-star reviews.
Yes.
Only 5 stars.
Yes.
But thank you so much. I so appreciate you. I encourage everyone to get his first 2 books. Be on the lookout for book number 3 coming out in fall of 2024, the end of the trilogy.
It's called Days of the Dark.
Days of the Dark. All right, and we've got Gift of the Shaper is book 1. So if you're getting right on board, start with book 1, Gift of the Shaper. And thank you again for being part of the show today. And we look forward to celebrating your success in 2024.
Thanks. You and I both. It's been a pleasure.
Take care.
All right.
So this has been another episode of the iBook Podcast. I'm April O'Leary signing off. Be sure to hop on over to o'learypublishing.com to start your author adventure and see what writing a book could do for you in your profession, in your career, and what doors it might open. We thank our guests for being a part of the show today, and be sure to subscribe to podcasts here on YouTube. We look forward to serving you and helping you get your book out into the world.